Good morning, Ospreys. My name is Audra Morrison, and I'm here from the College of Arts and Sciences Career Success Center. Today, we're going to talk about virtual interviewing. Virtual interviews can take place really in two different ways. You have the pre-recorded virtual interview, which is going to be where the employer sends you a set of questions that you record yourself responding to, and then you send to them. Then you have the live virtual interview, which is going to be taking place on a platform like Skype, which most people have heard of, or Zoom is becoming really popular now. Regardless of the platform or the type of virtual interview you have, it's essential that you are just as prepared as if it were a live interview. And with these virtual interviews, sometimes there's actually more room for error with things that wouldn't necessarily come up in a live interview. So we're going to talk about those things in this presentation today as well. So a survey that was done back in 2015 found that at that time, 75% of companies were using virtual interviews. And I can say from my own personal experience, when I was job searching in 2017, almost every single job I landed an interview with had a virtual interview as a precursor to the live interview. And it's very popular and it's very common for companies to do that and for them to want to get to know you before they spend the time bringing you on site, especially if you're coming from out of town and they would have to fly you in and arrange accommodations for you. So even back 3 years ago, before coronavirus and before all the changes that were going on in the job market, virtual interviews were still popular. We can see 75%, but I'd say now with all the changes that are going on, it's probably getting a lot closer to 90 or 100% of interviews are going to be taking place virtually. And that may mean, again, as a precursor to an on-site interview, or it could be exclusively virtual. That will just depend on the company. So before a virtual interview, you want to take into consideration a couple of things that sometimes you may not think about. So number one, ensuring that your internet connection is stable. There's nothing worse than being on a virtual interview and having your internet either go out completely and lose the interviewers, or have spotty internet where it's going in and out and you're having trouble hearing them and they're having trouble hearing you. If you know that the internet at your home or your place of work isn't typically strong, go somewhere where you know the internet is better. But you want to make sure that you are in a quiet location. So going over to Panera to use their internet may not be the best option, even if their internet is better, because there's going to be a lot of background noise and there's going to be a lot of things going on behind you in the camera. Not only do you want to make sure the location is quiet, you want it to be well lit. You don't want to be in an interview that's so dark that they can't see you and they really can't get a good idea of who you are. Another thing is that you want a solid background. You don't want anything in your background distracting the interviewers, and really you don't want anything that's going to take their attention off of you. So a solid background is best. You don't have to go to great lengths taking down pictures off your wall, but you really want to do your best to make sure there's limited distraction behind you. And that brings us to number 3, removing any other distraction. A popular one is our cell phones. Okay, almost all of us go everywhere with our cell phone. It's always in our pocket, on our desk. It's always right in front of us at all times. But when you're on an interview, that is not the place to have your cell phone going off or vibrating or buzzing. You don't want them to be able to hear those types of distractions. Another really popular distraction that people don't think about is pets. When you're doing a virtual interview or you're interviewing from home and your cat jumps up on the table and pounces across the camera, that can be very distracting for not only you, but also for the interviewers, and it can get things off track very quickly. So make sure your cats are in a different room, make sure your dogs aren't barking uncontrollably in a different room, and then of course other people as well. You don't want to be on an interview and have someone kind of walk behind the camera behind you. So take all of these things into consideration, and really you want to make sure you're alone. That's the most important thing. And then for logging in, so you don't want to log in too early, but you also obviously don't want to log in too late and arrive late to the interview. The caution with logging in too early is that there's the possibility that they could be interviewing other people for you on the same interview platform, on the same stream, and you could potentially interrupt another interview. Now, technically, it is in the employer's hands to ensure that that doesn't happen, and hopefully they, set enough space between each interview that that's not even on the table. But just to be safe, I would recommend about 5 minutes prior to the interview logging in, as opposed to 30 minutes before. Now, I would say that's too early. So some platforms that exist for pre-recorded virtual interviews are listed here on the screen. I've heard from different students who I've worked with, as well as different professionals out in the community, that these are some of the most popular ones, but this is by no means an all-inclusive list. Prior to your interview, the interviewer or the employer will very likely give you a link or tell you what platform the interview is taking place on. And it's up to you to do that research, download that platform, and make sure that you are ready for the interview prior to the start time. So you want to make sure you do your due diligence and look up the various sites that they may be using for their interview. Again, these are 3 popular ones, but that is by no means an all-inclusive list. For live virtual interviews, some of the most popular platforms that I hear about are Skype, BlueJeans, and Zoom. I have personally used all 3 and as the employer on the other side of the interview, as well as being the interviewee. When I was the interviewee, I also had to submit a pre-recorded video via YouTube one time. So I have experienced a variety of different platforms, and again, it kind of just comes back to the employer's preference, but it's up to you to make sure that you have the platform downloaded and ready by the time your interview starts. So just to discuss some common errors that may occur or that commonly occur during virtual interviews, we kind of already talked about the first one, but distractions on camera are one of the most popular errors and also one of the worst ones you can make. It can really derail the interview fast. Pets, people, distracting background with a lot of colors or designs or whatever the case may be. You want your background to be solid, plain, not distracting. Appearing disinterested. Even if you're not actually disinterested, it can easily be misinterpreted when you're not in person with someone. So if you're not making those extra steps to smile, nod when they're talking, if you're kind of just staring at the screen, they may not be able to read how you're actually feeling, and that may be misinterpreted as you being disinterested. So your nonverbals are very, very important on a video interview. Another common mistake is frequently moving around. If you're constantly moving into the camera, backing up, moving back in, if you really can't hear them and you're constantly tapping on your keyboard to turn things up, if you're on your phone doing a video interview and you're constantly moving your phone angle around, all of these things can be very distracting to the interviewers. It's best to have a stable platform, a desk, something that your computer or phone is propped up on so that you're not relying on holding it in front of you and having to frequently move. And of course, the last one, which is the most common across the board for in-person and virtual interviews, is inappropriate attire. And that goes for both top and bottom. Sometimes in a virtual interview, people think, oh, I only need to dress professionally from the waist up. But what if they ask you to take notes, or if you need to reference your resume, you have to get up to go grab that, and then they see you're wearing your pajamas underneath. You don't want that to happen. So appropriate attire, as if you were going to an in-person interview, you want to dress business casual at the very minimum, and business professional is typically more recommended. And we'll get into the differences of those 2 styles of dress later in this presentation. So now we're going to watch a short video clip, and after we watch this clip, we're going to talk about what went wrong in this gentleman's interview. And this was a popular viral video clip, so some of you may have seen this, but I really think it's a good example of what can go wrong in an interview. So hopefully this works. Let's try to watch this together.
No, I would argue that this is a triumph of democracy. Scandals happen all the time. The question is, how do democracies respond to those scandals?
And what will it mean for the wider region? I think one of your children has just walked in. I mean, shifting sands in the region. Do you think relations with the North may change?
I would be surprised if they do. Pardon me. My apologies.
What does this mean for the region?
My apologies. South Korea's policy choices on North Korea have been severely limited in the last 6 months to a year because of North Korea's behavior. Most recently, the use of VX gas in the airport in Malaysia that indicates that North Korea really doesn't follow global norms.
So what went wrong in that video? In my opinion, several things went wrong. First of all, his background was very distracting. He had bookshelves, he had maps everywhere, different papers, different books. There was a lot to look at in his background. And I don't know about you guys, but I really wanted to look at that and see what those things were. So that was the first distraction. Second distraction, obviously his children, or whoever's children those were, walked in the room. Now, I will give the guy props that he never broke eye contact with the camera. He tried his hardest to stay focused, and he actually even tried to continue responding once that child was in the room. But ultimately, it was a huge distraction to him. It was a distraction to the interviewer who pointed it out. And you'll notice that once those children leave the room, it kind of derailed the interview. He wasn't able to focus, and you could still hear the crying children even after they left the room. So lots of things went wrong in that gentleman's interview. And granted, some of those may have been out of his control, but nonetheless, they went wrong and were a huge distraction during the interview. With virtual interviews, with live interviews, regardless of the platform, even if it's a phone interview, practice is so important. The only way to get better at interviews is by doing them, by practicing either through real interviews, through mock interviews, or even just having a friend or family member ask you some questions. But really the only way to improve and to get better at talking about yourself and your content is to just keep saying it over and over. If you want to practice for a pre-recorded interview where you're responding to questions and then sending those to someone or recording yourself responding, we do have a resource on our website called Interview Stream, and that is exactly what it is set up for. Pre-recorded interview questions, you can record yourself, then you can watch yourself after you do the interview. And if you really want to take it to the next step, you can actually send the video recording to myself or another staff member, and we can go over your pre-recorded interview results with you. If you would like to prepare for a live interview or would just, like more of that face-to-face interaction, you're more than welcome to schedule a mock interview with, again, myself or one of our other staff members. And we're happy to do a virtual video conference mock interview with you to help you practice what that may be like as well. Practice looking at the camera rather than the screen. Practice having a solid background and testing out your audio and video quality, all of those different things. So if you're interested in scheduling one of those appointments with us, go ahead and send us an email at the email address listed on the screen, which is csc@unf.edu, and we will get you an appointment as soon as we can. If you do decide to download Interview Stream, I wanted to go ahead and include those instructions in this presentation just so you had them. I can also send these out via email as well. Final tips for virtual interviews. We've talked about these things, but they're so important, I wanted to end on them as well. Minimizing frequent motions, movements, nodding, smiling, show that you're engaged, show that you're a real human, not a robot. Look at the camera rather than the screen. Camera, screen, camera, screen, okay? We can tell where your eyes are, so it's best to look at the camera because they'll feel like you're looking at them. Practice. You have to practice. In order to be an excellent interview, it takes a lot of practice, and practice really does make perfect. So now we are going to go on to part 2 of this presentation, and we're going to talk more about, in general, interviews in general, whether those be virtual or in person, common questions, and those sorts of things. So I hope you stay tuned for part 2.